for everybody. I'm sorry about that. But the first 6 paragraphs, it's called Defenses of Benefit to Society, but it's that Pakenham letter. And that's what I want you to read. Now, I got a couple things I want you to do with it. Not that hard. Just you're going to jot down like an outline of a few things to turn in. But if I can't get the assignment to work, I'll copy it off the Word document and just post it in the assignment. It's annoying me, but I just want to make sure you only read this part. There's another part called the actual positive good theory, wrote a little bit later, and a few other things we'll get to. And then there's a couple worksheets for, we're going to watch at least one video, maybe 2, and then a Civil War map. But that's what the Civil War era is. And I did drop a quiz. I haven't had a chance to grade it, but I'm going to go through them after school today and tomorrow. But hopefully you're having no trouble with that. I hope it was very basic for everybody. And most of you have turned in the West, so that's great. So.
Hey, Mr. Partridge?
Yeah.
On one of them, I got an 11 out of 12, but there was no correct answer for the question.
Which question?
Oh, I can't remember. I took it this morning. I think it was I honestly don't remember, but all I remember, there was just no right answer.
Let me check it out. And for some reason it didn't happen, I'll make sure everyone gets another point. Anybody else have that problem?
Yeah, I did too.
Yeah, I had that for me too.
Yep.
That was my way to just challenge you. I'm trying to challenge you to make you just work harder for it.
It was the Guadalupe Treaty one or whatever.
The Treaty Guadalupe. That was probably the last one I typed and it mixed it up. Okay, I'll go back. When this class is done, I'll make sure, and if I didn't give you the point, I'll make sure you get the point. If you want the point. Do you want it, or do you want to? It's more sporting to take a 0 on that point question.
Let's take the 0 so we can work harder later in the quarter to make it
Very good. I like the way you think. I'll give you that point. I'm really sorry about it. At least it wasn't the wrong answer. That's something. Okay. So, and I jotted it down, so I'll check it after school. So tomorrow we have to meet. And let's go ahead then and get to. Oh, I didn't tell you about the assassination attempt.
When's the Mexican independence test? Because I saw the post, but I was a bit confused.
Mexican independent test? Did I type that?
There was some post about there was some PDFs to click on and like review stuff, but I was confused when it is.
Oh, the test won't be for another week, another week and a half. But I posted the Civil War packets and then the list for the chapters.
Okay.
So hopefully I'll go back and look at it, but that's what I try to do. So we don't have a test for another week. Now I'm going to give like a basic little open no quiz of what we do in class, just because it's kind of weird. I'll give that. For Friday, it'll be just like 10 questions. It'll be pretty basic. Okay, so I know you want this. Do you have the uniform? Do you see the outfit? I need that. But remember, Clay he was kind of wishy-washy on various things, and therefore he did not win the election, even though he thought it was his. Polk was the dark horse, 54-40 fight. Oh, remember Abel Upshur? Abel Upshur blew up. So after Abel Upshur blew up, who replaced Upshur as Tyler's Secretary of State? Do you remember?
My boy,
nothing to beat. But yes, of course, it's Calhoun. Let me do something here. How to change my settings. This is so exciting. You get to watch the whole creative process. Can you hear me okay? We're good? All right. So that's where we get the Pakenham letter, where they tried to make Texas an issue for Civil War, and the South went absolutely nuts when Britain had a chance, or Britain talked about maybe making Texas a protectorate. They absolutely just freaked out. And so we got the election, Texas, Polk won, Polk impaled. The joint resolution, Tyler signed it before Polk could, infuriating the Democrats, but Tyler got the last laugh. And that's where, did we finish right here with Jackson? So Jackson, still alive, and he would, the first ever attempted assassination of a president would be Andrew Jackson in 1835. Richard Lawrence, who believed that Jackson wasn't going to allow Lawrence to become the king of France. I'm not sure how that worked either. I would say Lawrence had a few issues, but let me get this up here. Lawrence approached Jackson as Jackson was taking his daily walk outside the White House. And now there are no guards for the president. The idea of the president being assassinated was seen as just ridiculous. He had a few friends walking with him, that's about it. But he had 2 loaded revolvers. Now these are flintlock revolvers, like those dueling pistols I showed you earlier when the Hamilton-Burr duel. And Lawrence walked up to Jackson and without hardly any warning, pulled out a revolver and click, snap, didn't fire. The hammer came down, nothing. Everyone just kind of shocked and went back. Pulled out the other one, click, nothing happened. Everybody just was totally shocked except for Jackson. Nobody to this day knows why the pistols didn't fire. They were examined after the assassination attempt and they were perfectly workable. Jackson should have been hit. There's no way. But for some reason they didn't. Everyone's shocked. Jackson recovers, grabs the guy by the lapel, throws him down, and begins to beat him nearly to death with his cane. They have to pull him off to save the guy's life. Where are we at here? Here's another picture of Jackson pulling the cane out. Richard Lawrence, his defense attorney, now this is in a territory, Washington, D.C., they would use the novel defense of innocent by reason of insanity. And he was acquitted because of that and was sent to what they called an insane asylum at that time. He'd be the first ever person in a federal court case to get off with that. And that's how Jackson survived the first assassination attempt. Somehow the man made it to 1845. And here's a picture of him in 1844. That is this amazing picture of him. Yeah, he's had a hard life. But he was asked right before he died if he had any regrets. And the regrets, I got to admit, are just so perfect. And you can guess the 2 people he hated the most. Yes, I didn't shoot Henry Clay and I didn't hang John C. Calhoun. Perfect Andrew Jackson quote. And you know, the hanging the John C. Calhoun, okay, so with that, I could see a reason for that. He did die in 1845. And his death, this is huge. Yes, he was a villain to so many people, but more people saw him as a symbol of democracy and a symbol of somebody who protected him from this dangerous new society that was being created. Remember, he took a horse and carriage to get from Nashville to Washington, D.C. when he was inaugurated. When he died, thousands of people came, many of them by this new thing called a train, to his funeral. There's a whole different world when he died. One more story about Jackson. He had a parrot. The parrot was given to him years before, when he was president. Now parrots live a long time, and so he was still alive. And this parrot was his constant companion. Always had this parrot around. And Jackson taught this parrot to swear. I mean, every curse word that was in the great book of curse words in the 1830s, along with anything else he could come up with. Now, we're not going to go through them in class because somebody would complain, but most of the words we know today that are swear words, they had then, and like every generation, they had their own unique swear words. So he taught this parrot to swear. So like somebody would come into the executive office and Jackson didn't want him there, Jackson would say a phrase, and that would trigger the parrot to start screaming obscenities, and that person would just leave, and Jackson would get a big kick out of this. So his parrot was always with him. When he died, they thought of this big memorial that thousands of people would be there. The parrot should be there. And so they brought the parrot, and they had it in a cage under one of those hood, which means like a blanket over the cage. So it's basically asleep in the cage. Thomas Hart Benton, senator from Missouri, got done with one of the eulogies, and somebody decided, well, we should let him see the parrot. So they lifted the hood up, and the parrot kind of woke up. And then somebody said the phrase, and the parrot just started screaming obscenities. And if you've ever been around a parrot, parrots are loud. And that high voice went through the entire auditorium, and they couldn't shut the parrot up. They put the hood over it, the parrot kept screaming. They took it out, they could hear it behind the stage. They finally just had to kind of quit the memorial service. And I'm pretty sure Jackson would have appreciated that. And so that's a statue of Andrew Jackson copying the one in New Orleans. That's the one in Lafayette Square in front of the White House. And Jackson's a pretty complicated president. He represents many of the good and bad things about the United States. The horrors, the absolute nightmare of the genocidal trail of tears and slavery, combined with this concept of democracy and that people are ultimately sovereign. It's a complex history. That's one of the reasons why Jackson is such a controversial and fascinating character. But young Hickory's president. I love this picture because if you look at it, can you see all the imperfections in it? All the bubbles and scratches, because this was on a glass negative. The silver oxide in these first cameras would make the negative on a piece of glass. And so any imperfections in the glass would also be shown, and you could see it in this picture, including one big crack. So I really like this picture. And you like his hair flowing behind. He looks like he has a mullet before the term mullet was used, when the term mullet still just meant a fish. But he said he had 4 goals. He's going to get these 4 things done and then not run for re-election. The 4 goals: lower the tariff. And the tariff, they did lower it a little bit. Next, an independent treasury. Now, this independent treasury, a little bit like what Martin Van Buren did, so a way to distribute money outside the banking system. So no Bank of the United States. That passed. Next, remember 5440 or fight? Those very bombastic terms saying you will go to war. Well, no. They signed a treaty, a compromise treaty with Britain, just extending the 49th parallel to the sea. So the current border today, the Oregon Territory was split in half, and it showed his very pragmatic approach. Polk didn't want the whole thing. He was using it as kind of a threat and that sort of thing. And lastly, acquire California. And he's going to try to buy this from Mexico. And the thing about this was he'd get it, not the way he had originally hoped. All 4 of the things that Polk said he would do, he did, and then would not run for re-election. And this fierce man would leave office, but we're not done. We got to get there first. So we're coming up to, though, the Mexican-American War. Now, if you ever see, or it's also called the Mexican War. The Mexican War. And if you ever see this, a war with 2 countries in it, like the Mexican-American War, the Spanish-American War, the Russo-Japanese War, whatever country is named first, they lost. So Mexico's going to lose. Spain lost. Russia lost to Japan. Franco-Prussian War. France lost to Prussia, Germany. So if you ever see that, and this map right there, that's a map of Mexico from 1844. So it's before the United States annexed Texas. It's a great map. It's really accurate. But let's get back to this then. So, I should add one more thing. The state of Montana has 2 flagship colleges. That means it's 2 state universities, MSU and Montana, and University of Montana. So MSU and University of Montana. And so whenever they play like a game, so the football game, basketball game, the proper way to say it, because you always name the loser first, is Cat-Riz. Does that make sense to everybody? It's Cat-Riz game because you named the loser first. Okay, with that, and I hope I angered some Cat fans. Before the war actually began, John Slidell was sent down to Mexico City. That's a picture of him. He became a Confederate diplomat. He's got this weird kind of hand on his hip thing. But he was going to try to get the 3 things they wanted. The Rio Grande is the southern border of Texas. We've talked about this. It's called Forgive U.S. Claims, but U.S. citizens had claims to the Mexican government, meaning the Mexican government owed them money, bonds. And those are called claims. So the U.S. said, we'll pay those claims. And then to buy California and New Mexico. Forgive U.S. claims, buy California and New Mexico. But Mexico was furious. Mexico was furious at the United States for annexing Texas. In fact, Santa Anna was removed from power, and he and his 1,000 legs, remember he had wooden legs, they all went to Havana, Cuba, which was a Spanish colony still. So they got a military dictatorship in Mexico right at that moment. And they refused to even listen to listen to Slidell. They sent Slidell packing, kind of snubbed him, infuriating Polk, and now he had to come up with a two-pronged way to get it. And he decided to provoke the Mexicans. So that's the Slidell mission. He decided to provoke a war. And what he did is he sent Zachary Taylor. Zachary Taylor was a very experienced general, veteran along the frontier. And the U.S. had a very tiny army, just a tiny, minuscule army, but they sent a little over 1,000 men down to the mouth of the Rio Grande. Now, this was disputed territory. This area right here was the area that Mexico claimed that was all Texas. Now remember, Texas has been annexed by the United States. So Mexico claimed this is the border. The U.S. claim is the Rio Grande. So Zachary Taylor went right to there. By the way, if you look at Zachary Taylor over here, you'll notice right here under his nose, you should probably get that looked at. Just throwing that out there. That doesn't look right. But, okay, that's one of the imperfections. And Zachary Taylor's goal was to aggressively patrol on the Rio Grande to provoke the Mexicans into attacking the United States and giving them a reason to go to war to get California. That's the plan. So this is to provoke a war. Now, this was not made known. They presented it as, in the newspapers, Zachary Taylor's just going to defend the American border from Mexican aggression, but it was the exact opposite. So they begin to patrol with cavalry, and they begin patrolling both north of the Rio Grande and south of the Rio Grande, which was without a doubt Mexican territory, to provoke a Mexican action. The Rio Grande is really a narrow river and quite shallow. There are a number of places that horses and people can cross with barely getting their knees wet. And so it's easy to cross back and forth. So this is a really provocative action. Ironically, Taylor, who ordered it, was opposed to it. He was a Whig, and he didn't like the fact that this appeared to be a democratic war to expand democratic power, more democratic states. Texas could be, and New Mexico, California, they're thinking this might be 8 or 9 democratic states or even more. But one more thing about Taylor. Taylor, this old veteran of the War of 1812 and frontier fighting, was kind of beloved by the men. He was a hard fighter, didn't really care so much about the spick and span nature of discipline, like having the perfectly cleaned and pressed uniform, shined buttons, all of that. All he cared about if you fought. In fact, in battle, he never wore his uniform. On campaign, he wore a red flannel shirt and a straw hat. So he was nothing at all like some of these generals who demanded, marionettes are called, demanded like perfectly spick and span uniforms. In fact, his men gave him a nickname. They called him Ole. Remember, it's got to be Ole. Ole Rough and Ready. Old rough and ready is kind of a term of endearment. Doesn't that remind you of old hickory or maybe old Tippecanoe? This is what we call foreshadowing.
You muted yourself.
Here we go. The Thornton, April 25th, 1846, U.S. Dragoons were patrolling somewhere and they were attacked by the Mexicans. You notice I put down where? They're attacked by Mexicans. And this is the attack. The U.S. would claim it's unprovoked. They were attacked by Mexicans. By the way, anybody know what a dragoon is? It's a fire-breathing lizard. We had hundreds of those. We could take over the world. No, a dragoon is mounted infantry. What it means is they're like regular combat soldiers who normally marched. They rode on horses and then would dismount to fight. That's all it is. So it's kind of like cavalry. Somewhere they were attacked. It got back to Polk. Polk went to Congress and said, the Mexicans made an unprovoked attack on American soldiers on American soil north of the Rio Grande. And this would be.
You muted yourself again.
How am I muting myself? A lot of Whigs voted against this, but it passed pretty, with a pretty big vote, even though the war is going to be pretty unpopular. So, this declaration of war, and as it was, some issues there. Polk said it was unprovoked. No, it was provoked. Polk said it was north of the Rio Grande. They had no idea. They literally had no idea. Was Thornton's company attacked south of the Rio Grande? Were they attacked north? Or, most likely, the attack happened south and he retreated north of the Rio Grande and the attack kind of was this running battle. That's almost certainly what happened. But Polk said, without a doubt, Mexico made an unprovoked attack. This is what we call a lie. Polk lied to get the United States into war to take California. I should add, this was not a foregone conclusion. Today, the United States is a lot bigger country, a wealthier country with a huge army. And so it doesn't seem like Mexico would have much of a chance. But back then, no, it was much more even. The U.S. was a little bit bigger, a little bit wealthier, but it could have gone either way. So this is a pretty risky move. But he lied to get the United States into this war. And people were talking about this almost. This was put up by the state of Texas long after the Civil War. But it says, if you can't read it, the spot where American blood was shed on American soil. This is where Captain Thornton was attacked. American blood on American soil. It was controversial. This war appeared to be based on a lie. Now, you should all feel good that this kind of thing would never happen again. Never would the United States lie to go to war. Rest easy, nothing to see here, move on. What I did there is called lying. I lied to you. Yes, the United States is going to do this many more times. It kind of set the precedent because Polk, he reaped the benefits. That's the Spanish-American War would be based upon a lie. All the Indian wars were basically lies. One of the most famous, the Vietnam War. It's called the Tonkin Gulf incident. A complete bald-faced lie. Heck, it happened in your lifetime. The United States, because it was going on while you were born, the United States invasion of Iraq. The U.S. said, without a doubt, Iraq has weapons of mass destruction, like nuclear weapons, so we have to attack. Not only did they not have nuclear weapons, they had no idea. They lied and said they knew. That's what we call a lie. So this is going to happen many times. Abraham Lincoln was one of many Whigs who were elected to Congress in opposition to the war. There's a very young Abraham Lincoln. I love that picture. You see the imperfection in the glass. And one more thing about Lincoln, you can really see he was a big guy. He always looked kind of skinny. He was not. He was big, and those hands are like these big meat hooks. But I'll tell you some Lincoln stories. He was a Whig, and on the floor of the United States Congress in 1847, he would ask for what's called the spot resolution. And the spot resolution was this. Lincoln said, I want to vote to force the president to show the spot where American blood was shed. Show him the spot, because they didn't believe it was north of the Rio Grande. Now, it didn't pass, but that would give Lincoln some credibility, that spot where American blood was shed, as he was opposed to this war. Now, let's go back one slide. You notice how it says the spot. This was done after the Civil War as a slap in the face to Lincoln. Texas hated Lincoln. Civil War, Texas with the Confederacy. Lincoln not only prosecuted the Civil War, also issued the Emancipation Proclamation and the 13th Amendment. What's on the 13th Amendment? They blamed Lincoln. Remember, Texas was a state that they could break up into 5 states, and they talked about doing that to stop civil rights. And so that's Texas right there. So Lincoln and the resolution. And don't forget this, I didn't type this in, but I should have. Remember, a lot of Whigs feared. In fact, let me type that in so I don't forget. Where's the mouse? Hey, you just got to deal with it. They feared slave power. Remember slave power and the 3/5 compromise? Slave power. So, with that happening, this war was actually very controversial. Part 2 of the plan, the California Revolt. California revolted against Mexican rule on June 14th, 1846. So 1846. Now, you'll notice it's a couple months after the U.S. declared war, but 1846, how did you know? There was no telegraph service that far west, and so they were operating under the idea that Mexico and the United States were not at war. So these are people who immigrate from the United States to Mexico, California, and Californians who were Mexicans, citizens. They revolted. Now, the U.S. would claim this was done purely by those in California against the tyranny of the Mexican dictatorship. Oh, there's an element of that. But here's a couple other weird things happen. A U.S. naval squadron just happened to show up off the coast of San Francisco and help with the revolt. That's weird. Also, a U.S. mapping expedition under a general by the name of, or a captain at that time, would eventually become a general, John Fremont right there, with a company of U.S. soldiers, arrived in Sonoma a couple weeks before the revolt, and they joined and helped the revolt to make sure that the tiny Mexican forces there couldn't put it down. I think you get the point. The U.S. aided and helped and encouraged this revolt. And they wanted to make it like the Texan revolt so then they could annex California. So if they couldn't provoke a war there, they'll just annex the newly independent Bear Flag Republic. And that is the first flag of Texas, or of California, in Sonoma, California, north of San Francisco. And it was this big canvas sheet, kind of yellowish as I understand it. And the slap paint, it was red. And they had a stenciled in star, kind of like the Lone Star State, U.S. stars for states, and a bear. The flag of California is very much like that now. And that's the first flag. Unfortunately, that flag would be burned. It would, it's in a museum in San Francisco. And in the 1906 San Francisco earthquake, when the town caught fire, the flag was lost, which is unfortunate. So that's all we have is a black and white picture. Would have been pretty cool to see that. But they expected to be annexed by the United States. And yes, that's coming. But back to the war. Taylor is down here. Now, the problem Taylor has is there is a couple thousand Mexican soldiers down here. In fact, they're at a fort at Monterrey. There would be one small battle here we're not going to talk about. But he's getting all these untrained volunteers. In fact, so many volunteers came from one state. So many volunteers came from one state, Tennessee, that they're going to be known as the volunteer state. The volunteer state. And if you ever at the University of Tennessee, their mascot, the Volunteers. That's where it comes from. But the United States had all these untrained troops, but so did Mexico. The U.S. had the great advantage, though. Okay, remember the fort at West Point? Well, in 1821, that had become the United States Military Academy, copying the French. So the U.S. had trained and relatively competent officers. Now, it didn't mean they were right or necessarily great officers, but they were officers that were professionals, and the men trusted them. The Mexican officer corps was infamous for being corrupt, and this is really going to hurt their army. Now, Taylor's plan is to take his untrained force into Mexico and win one big battle. And Chase, I see your cat all over. I love that. That's awesome. But we're coming to the Battle of Monterrey. And Monterrey, the Mexicans were at a fort on a cliff overlooking Monterrey, rugged mountains, really difficult fight. But after a 3-day back and forth battle, Taylor's forces took Monterrey. And this was a huge victory. And the assumption was Mexico would just quit and give the United States California. They didn't quit. Monterrey was a big victory. By the way, here's one of those lithographs I mentioned before. With the printing press and new production techniques with the Industrial Revolution, this became just a craze, and people would get pictures of battles or heroes or generals or things like that, and they put these cheaply made watercolors on their walls. Now, to me, this doesn't look all that great, but in 1845 or 1848 or something, this was amazing. But Mexico didn't quit. And there's another problem for Polk. Polk realizes we need another victory. But Taylor is a Whig. Taylor was opposed to the expansion of slave power, even though he followed orders. And they didn't want Old Rough and Ready to win another battle, because Polk could see Old Rough and Ready using the same formula as Old Tippecanoe in 1840, winning the Whig nomination for president and become the president based upon being a war hero. And so it was like, oh gosh, I don't want that. In fact, they took away all of Taylor's trained troops and gave it to another general, so Taylor couldn't win a big victory. But remember Santa Anna? Well, that's going on. Taylor's losing his forces. By December of 1846, Santa Anna had sent word to Washington, D.C. He's in Havana and said, you help me get back the U.S. The U.S. helps me get back to Mexico. I will take power again, and I will give you California. I'll give you New Mexico. It's all yours. So Polk thought about it and figured, what the heck? Maybe we can do this without having another battle and get California and New Mexico not to fight. And so the U.S. helped Santa Anna get to Veracruz. Right here, Veracruz. Santa Anna, and it jumped off the boat. All its luggage, including over 1,000 wooden legs, came along with him. And he was met as his conquering hero. Everyone cheered. Santa Anna went up to Mexico City, took power again, and immediately announced he will do everything in his power to drive back the United States and retake Texas. He fooled him and lied. A terrible mistake by Polk. Santa Anna was flawed, but he was competent, and now they have a chance. And so while the U.S. is preparing an invasion to take Mexico City at this harbor called Tampico, Taylor is up here with nothing but untrained troops and very few professional officers. And Santa Anna attacked at the Battle of Buena Vista. The Battle of Buena Vista, February 1847. And this shows, okay, the beautiful view, right? It shows the mountains. It shows how rugged this terrain was. And This was a back and forth 2-day battle that the Mexicans tried almost suicidal charges, showing incredible courage, nearly broke through the American lines. But here's another lithograph. It would turn into, though, at the end of the day, the U.S. held in a big victory for Taylor, and he became even a bigger hero, even a bigger one. And old Rough and Ready will take the Battle of Buena Vista to run for president in 1846 or 1848, Polk's worst fear. And this lithograph, okay, they're really close, but it shows the weapon. See these brass cannons? They were firing a relatively new weapon from Europe called canister. Remember grape shot, which is like 12 small cannonballs that fired in a big, like almost like a shotgun? Well, this is like even a bigger shotgun. Imagine a big can, like a cylinder, about that wide, this long, filled with about 250 musket balls. 1847. Buena Vista was 1847. They would fire this, and it, even just a devastating shotgun, it would leave just destroyed humans 100 feet in front of the cannon. This weapon would be one of the most brutal weapons of the Civil War. And this, with superior American officers, won at Buena Vista. Won at Buena Vista. Taylor's even a bigger hero, but Mexico stayed in the fight. And last thing for today. To lead the actual attack on Mexico City for that one big victory was maybe America's greatest general, Winfield Scott, hero of the War of 1812, very experienced, one of the greatest generals in American history. He too was a Whig, but he didn't scare Polk because his reputation as one who of a marionette. He cared more about discipline and polished uniforms, polished buttons. In fact, his nickname, remember Old Rough and Ready? His nickname, Old Fuss and Feathers. And Old Fuss and Feathers doesn't quite have the allure as Old Rough and Ready. So tomorrow we finish this. We have to come to class, regular day, so normal 10, whatever, or 11, 13, or whatever. And have that reading assignment. I'll get the thing on defense of slavery. I'm sorry about that. I blame society. But if there's no questions, all right, enjoy your lunch. You got 20 full minutes till 6th period. Isn't that exciting? I will see you tomorrow.